folks, we have a Harvard-trained economist, Professor Laurence Kotlikoff. He has been on our show before, in fact, I think 3 times over the past few years. He has recently been selected into the ranks of the top 25 economists. I was there. He knocked me off the list. I'm lying, but it sounded good. All right. And he is disturbed by Donald Trump's rise in frustrated by U.S. economic policy. And I guess we've all joined those ranks at this point in time. As a result, Professor Kotlikoff has decided to run for president himself. The tax expert and economics professor at Boston University spent 3 months last year writing a 157-page platform, an economist wish list that rides roughshod over the traditional left-right divide. Let's hear what he has to say. I'm sure it is not what you want to hear, but it's what we must hear to understand the dire condition this country is actually in. During our live broadcast, we invite you to call 646-652-4620 with any comments or questions you might have for Professor Kotlikoff. And remember, if you're listening to the program via telephone and you want to break in, press the 1 button so we know where you want to break in. And in the interest of full disclosure, I have contributed to Professor Kotlikoff's campaign, although the state of Oklahoma does not permit write-in candidates. So, but he has my money with my blessing. Professor Kotlikoff, welcome to Liberty Talk Radio.
Well, I want to thank you, Joe, so much for supporting my candidacy. It's really a deep pleasure and honor. And I think for Oklahoma listeners, the fact that there's no line for the president and the vice president to be written in doesn't mean they couldn't write our names, Laurence Kotlikoff for president and Edward Leamer for vice president, right on the ballot document. And I think that Oklahoma has a constitutional obligation to count those votes. So if we got close to winning, we would sue the state of Oklahoma. So please do write us in right on the ballot.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I heard that they would not. In fact, just the other day they were talking about people writing in, and some official on radio said, "Oh no, we're not going to count those votes. They can write them in, but they're not going to be counted. We're going to disregard them."
They can be sued and they can go to jail if they are violating the law. So I would hope these guys would not be so smug about how they treat the Constitution.
Let's sue them anyway.
Well,
they should be sued.
I'm not Donald Trump. I don't sue people left and right.
Well, I understand your frustration because I guess it's shared by so many people, so many citizens of the United States. We're all frustrated. I think this is the why we have the rise of Donald Trump. Although, quite frankly, he doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and people cheer every time he speaks. It reminds me of, I guess, if you look back at history, when Adolf Hitler would be giving his speeches, people were so tired of starvation because of the agreements made with the Western world on Germany after World War I. People were starving. They would accept anything from anyone. And I think about that when I hear Donald Trump speak and everyone cheering. They said, boy, they'll listen to anyone and cheer anything that he says, anything other than what the status quo. And I guess that's one reason why you're running.
Yeah, I feel that both parties are into this for political power and maintaining that power through time. They're not really into this for the next generation. They're into it for the next election. And, Trump is putting his finger on certain issues that are concerning people. Real wage growth, has stopped for most people in this country decades ago. And employment is very tough to get. It's very tough to get good jobs, tough to get any job, even for college grads these days. You can be out of work for months until you find something. So it's a tough labor scene. We've got very little investment going on in the country, very little national saving. We've got a fiscal policy that's completely insolvent. Our government's broke. It's not broke in 75 years or 50 years or 25 years. It's broke today. The true debt, when you put everything on the books, that's to say all the unfunded liabilities for defense spending, that's a liability too, just like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Put everything on the books, you're 206 trillion in the red, and that's 10 times GDP. So the country is totally broke. So, you wonder why we can't afford to do things like upgrade our infrastructure, like provide decent education to our kids, to fund NASA at the level we used to fund basic research, National Institute of Health and so forth, National Science Foundation. It's because the country is broke, and it's realizing over time, even just despite the phony bookkeeping, that it can't pay for things. So we have to get our fiscal house in order. We're leaving a massive fiscal bill to our kids. We are leaving massive risks to our kids in the form of climate change, in the form of nuclear threats from North Korea. We have to really understand that it's our children. That's the theme of my campaign. And my website is Kotlikoff2016.com, Kotlikoff2016.com. I think it's very important, Joe, for your viewers and listeners to understand that I'm actually the only writing candidate in the country. There may be thousands of other writing candidates, but they won't have their votes counted because they're not registered in all the states that require registration. Now, Oklahoma just says they're not going to do anything. I think that's just plain illegal. But other states, most states, say you have to go through these very extensive hoops to register to be a writing candidate. So, for example, in California, we had to get 55 people to notarize a form that said they would be our electors if we were to win California. So it's been a long process starting last May to be to the point where I am now, which is I can receive far more than 270 electoral votes, and there's no other writing candidate, including this guy, Evan McMullen, who's mostly a writing candidate. He cannot get as many electoral votes as I can, from what I understand, because he came in too late to actually be on the ballot in more than 11 states, and he's in too late to get registered as a writing candidate in many large states like Florida, for example. So you're looking and talking to one of the 5 people that can actually be elected president, maybe 6 if you include McMullen. Now, out of those 6, there's only one person who actually gives a damn about our kids and actually is willing to say it like it is in terms of telling the truth. The country's broke. The country has a Social Security system that is dysfunctional and 32% underfinanced. The Detroit pensions were 20% underfinanced when they took the Detroit city under. The Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, employer-based healthcare, the entire set of healthcare programs that the federal government is heavily involved in are a mess. They need to be all closed down and replaced with something very simple that gives everybody a basic plan. And I got the idea of that solution, my healthcare solution, from John Goodman, who's actually a libertarian economist. He used to run the National Center for Policy Analysis. Now he has the Goodman Institute. So I've taken ideas and my own ideas from top economists in the academic world, primarily in the academic world, but also in the policy world, over the years, put them together to figure out how's the best way to fix Social Security. How do we redo Social Security for younger people? How do we freeze the current system, treat everybody that's paid in fairly, pay off what we owe? How do we set up something new for younger people that will be fully funded and pay for itself and not leave them broke in old age? How do we fix the healthcare system? Very simply, postcard-length solutions in every case. How do we fix the banking system for real? Dodd-Frank is actually a joke. It was put in to give bureaucrats jobs, more jobs, but it didn't actually fix anything fundamentally. The potential for a risk for the financial system to collapse, I think, is bigger than ever, thanks to Dodd-Frank, because what they said is, we're not going to fix the 2 core problems, which is leverage and opacity, and which is kind of faith-based or trust me banking. We're not going to, borrow money, trust me, I'm the bank, give me your money, trust me, I'll pay it back for sure, and then I go gamble with it. No, gee, I lost it, sorry, your problem. But now I'm going to go to the taxpayer to bail me out. That's still in place. There's still opacity. There's still massive leverage, 33-to-1 leverage allowed by Basel III, and uh, and now the Fed and the Treasury have their hands tied thanks to Dodd-Frank. When things hit the fan, they won't be able to bail out the financial system. So we're actually doubling down on the risk to our kids because it's their economy we're going to destroy. I've got a very simple financial reform called limited purpose banking, which makes all the banks act like 100% equity financed mutual funds, just like the mutual funds where we put our 401ks. All the money, no money is borrowed by that mutual fund, which is like a little bank. It's all, they sell equities, shares to your mutual fund. You contribute to your mutual fund, and then the money is invested in mortgages or stocks or government bonds, whatever it is. We have 10,000 mutual funds. In the crash in 2008, not a single equity finance mutual fund had any trouble. The only mutual funds that got into trouble were the ones that were leveraged. Those were the money market funds where they promised to pay back to the buck what was owed. So they had a clear promise to pay back for sure, which they couldn't keep. They lied about that promise. So there's a way to fix the financial system very simply. It's been endorsed by 5 Nobel laureates, by George Shultz, by top economists around the world, by the former head of the Bank of England. So, it's right there. It's very simple to fix. You look at the tax reform issue. The tax system is a mess. We've got an estate tax that's dysfunctional, collects essentially no revenue. It's a voluntary tax to a large extent. We have an income tax that's a crazy mess, mix of like 7 or 8 different tax systems. We have a corporate income tax, which again is doing one thing, driving our companies out of the country, but not collecting much revenue because of all the loopholes. So I would get rid of all those 3 taxes. I'd replace them with something that's actually highly progressive, but also gives people incentives to work, because one of the things our system has, our fiscal system, is we have something like 20 different tax and transfer programs that each of which can take away money from you if you earn more money. You can lose 23 cents on the dollar in food stamps if you're poor, 22 cents in the earned income tax credit, your Medicaid benefits, your welfare benefits. Then you have to pay state sales taxes and state income taxes. And that by itself can put you into the 80%, if not higher, tax bracket. So we're locking the poor into poverty. So we need to have everybody have the same incentive to work. And under my tax reform, again, it's highly progressive, but everybody pays just 30 cents at the margin on the money they earn from working. And then here's what I have, Joe. I have an inheritance tax that hits starting at $5 million of inheritance. I have a value-added tax, which Ted Cruz proposed. I have a progressive consumption tax at a personal level that just hits the rich people that are consuming more than 100,000. Trump would not escape my progressive consumption tax. I have an $80 per metric ton carbon tax that goes into effect immediately, so we don't tell dirty energy producers that, the Paris Accord says you've got 15, 20 years. Why don't you exploit all your dirty energy right now, drop the price of oil, pump it like crazy, dig up the coal, increase all the output of dirty energy, pump it, burn it, heat up the climate, and tip the planet. And that's exactly what's happening. So, it just doesn't make any economic sense. I'm the first economist to run for president. I have a reform of the education system, which I think will use modern technology to give uniform online education to every kid in the country from pre-K through 12th grade in pods, where all this would be subsidized by the federal government. So now think about it. Everybody gets an equalized education, at least for 3 hours a day. The best teachers in the country provide this online education. And guess what? You lower effectively class sizes because you're sitting in front of a screen that's working at your pace. And it's moving on to the next lesson once you've shown you can actually learn the material you're supposed to have learned. If not, they switch the way the education occurs. This has already been tested in New York City, and it's being expanded in New York. So we can fix education, we can fix all these things, but we have to do it with somebody who actually gives a damn about our kids. I just released a blog on my website yesterday. It's called The War on Our Children. It goes through 10 different weapons that we are using to destroy the lives of our children, including giving them a lousy education, saddling them with college debt, fiscal bills out the wazoo, uh, North Korea, not dealing seriously with the threat that they pose. It's very much like the Cuban Missile Crisis that both you and I watched on TV, in black and white TV. Remember
Right.
when you
Oh, I
were
sure did. Yeah.
you, right? I was 11. I'm 65. How old are you, Joe?
Oh, I'm only 73. Boy, when I get your age, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Well, President Kennedy, the situation he faced back then, and I'm not trying to suggest I'm anything like that I'm President Kennedy or remotely, uh, that I remotely have his qualities and competencies, but I think I'm far more capable of leading the country than Hillary Clinton. I also have, but I think the situation with North Korea is very much akin to what we saw back in '62 in the Cuban Missile Crisis. President Kennedy did not flinch. Now, you did not hear North Korea come up at all last night in the debate. I don't think it came up once in the two prior debates. That's our number
That's right.
one
Yeah.
national security risk. In 10 years, North Korea will be able, I think 10 or 15 years, be able to deliver the nuclear tip weapons. They have nuclear warheads already manufactured. They're making more every day. They'll be able to deliver them to any doorstep in America via submarines. They already have a range of 300 miles. They could be parked right outside of Los Angeles right today. Now, Hillary Clinton's idea is that we should have missile systems. Well, uh, let's hope that they would work, but I wouldn't want to trust that they would work if North Korea is launching 100 missiles at once at us.
Yeah.
Nor
But
would I want to. Yeah.
you really think that's a logical probability only because if in fact we were attacked and we suspected that the missiles came from North Korea is an awfully small area. It wouldn't take but a couple of missiles and it'll just be a hellhole there in a matter of seconds. Why would any country that size jeopardize their entire country? Every square inch of their country, every person in their country, all the leaders in their country, they would all be wiped off the face of the earth in a matter of hours because they decided to launch a missile on the United States. I can't understand that logic. And maybe logic has no play in it, obviously.
I think that's the issue, whether logic has any, we've been dealing with the North Koreans on this issue for 35 years with the Chinese at the table. We've gotten nowhere. All they've done is under cover of these negotiations, develop nuclear weapons, and then they've miniaturized them. And we've just sat back. And now they're developing launch mechanisms of missiles that are ballistic missiles that can go into outer space and come back down. Now, if Kim preemptive basis on his radio and different media outlets in North Korea. We have to tell him in very unmistakable terms, and that's what I would do as president on day one of taking office, that there's a moratorium on any further missile testing of any range, short, medium, long-range missiles by North Korea that will be militarily enforced. There's also a moratorium being imposed today on North Korea of any nuclear weapons testing. And if you violate that, or if we see that you're about to violate that, we will destroy everything you have in the realm of missiles, missile platforms, submarines, and nuclear facilities, nuclear weapons facilities, the same afternoon. And at the same time, by the same token, we're willing to sit down with you immediately and sign a peace treaty that, sorry, that's my assistant, my cat.
I have a cat too and 4 dogs right now, but I know what you're going
through. So I think our country has reached a point after decades of conflict with North Korea, that we're willing to recognize North Korea, we're willing to sign a peace treaty, we're willing to normalize trade relations, as long as they agree to, first of all, include South Korea in this peace arrangement and Japan, and also to dismantle all their nuclear weapons that they now have and all their nuclear weapons production facilities. Those would be the only conditions. So I'm for normalizing relations with North Korea and helping them rebuild their country. So if the leader, the great leader in North Korea is, and I'm willing to meet with him. So maybe he's not that crazy. Maybe he's different from what he comes across to us via our media. But whatever he is, I'm willing to meet with him and make this happen. But I'm not letting him fire another missile in the direction of our country, even if it can't hit our country yet, even if we now have the means to stop the 1 or 2 missiles he could fire in a single day. In 10 years, 20 years, he'll be able to fire 100 missiles at once. And then when you talk to people who are in the anti-missile business, who actually work on these things at different defense contractors, and you ask them, could we stop 100 missiles that were launched simultaneously from North Korea? And they kind of shake their head, or they kind of hesitate to say, oh, they don't say absolutely yes. Now, if we had a war with North Korea where we lost San Francisco and they lost every inch of their landmass, that would be a defeat for the United States, because frankly, we don't care about North Korea that much. We do care about San Francisco, and to have San Francisco wiped out and uninhabitable for centuries is not our game plan. So we have to confront North Korea at this point when we have the military superiority. And that's just an example of the risk that we're placing our kids, because the natural instinct of older people, this is a generational war here, Joe, you have to be clear. I've been writing about this generational conflict for decades. I wrote a book in the 90s called Generational Accounting. I wrote The Coming Generational Storm in the early 2000s. In the late 2000s, I wrote The Clash of Generations. These are all books about the fiscal train wreck that our politicians were taking us down, or taking our kids down. And now I see this happening in other dimensions, in other spheres, in terms of climate, in terms of education, providing our kids third-rate education, in providing our kids third-rate health care, and very expensive at that. You know, my son's 26, he just went on to my COBRA plan from Boston University. The expense that a 26-year-old has to face is just enormous to get a decent health insurance policy in terms of out-of-pocket, deductibles, co-pays. When you add it all up, it's probably a quarter of his disposable income. It's, you know, if you have any kind of medical issues that have to be taken care of. So we have to fix that, and we have to give everybody a basic healthcare policy, but we have to do it with private provision, private competition, have hyper competition. On this, I agree with Trump. The idea of having each state kind of stop the competition across borders of health insurance companies, that's not the answer. So sometimes Trump by accident actually says something that connects with a real problem. I think let me, I know I'm doing all the talking here, and I'll stop to take a breath in a second, but I think he's also onto something with immigration, because, you know, when you bring in 1 million people a year, 850,000 of whom are unskilled or low skilled, to compete with American workers, you're putting direct pressure on their wages and their jobs. And that's what we're doing year after year these days. So even though the immigration rate itself is relatively low, the absolute number of Americans is very high compared to where it was like in 1950. So a small percentage of a very big number is a lot of immigrants coming in to compete with American workers. So I would cut immigration, legal immigration. Our problem is not illegal immigrants, because more illegal immigrants are leaving than coming. So if Trump puts up that wall, he's going to actually add to illegal immigration, because he won't let people leave. He won't let the illegal immigrants get out, because more of them are leaving than coming. I would have that wall with a hole for people, okay? Right. And an invitation, a red carpet to leave, okay? But that's not our big problem. Our big problem is legal immigration and the skill composition. I would shift the skill composition to high-skilled workers away from low-skilled workers, take some of the pressure off our low-skilled workers in this country, and that would do, that would, I think, help the situation. But I'm also, with my tax reform, which is going to have no corporate tax. Think about that, Joe. We're talking about our country having the lowest, the most tax-friendly climate of any developed country in the world. It would lead to massive investment in the U.S. And the rich are not going to get off the hook from this, because right now they're able to get off the hook because they take their corporations and move them out of the country. That's how they get off the hook right now. So Hillary Clinton's idea that you can tax corporations more and actually get the rich to pay, it's just not reality-based. Her idea that you can raise marginal tax rates and get the super rich to pay more, it's not reality-based, because here's what they do. The super rich just borrow against their assets. They never declare capital gains, or they just harvest their capital losses to pay for their consumption. They borrow to pay for their consumption. They harvest their capital losses to pay for their consumption. They never declare income. When they die, they pass their appreciated assets to their kids via what's called a step-up in basis, and the kids never have to pay capital gains taxes, and the estate doesn't on those on those accrued capital gains. So Clinton's tax reform will do nothing to go after the super rich. The super rich are just sitting back in their homes, contributing to Hillary and smiling and laughing at this entire thing. What I'm going to do is tax their consumption, their worldwide consumption, based on what's called a cash flow tax. It was developed in the 80s by Senators Nunn and Domenici. It's a bipartisan tax reform proposal called the USA tax. I'd also include consumption services on yachts, mansions, and planes, and any expensive durables like paintings. Donald Trump would have to pay tax on that, whatever, $1,000 or $10,000 picture of himself that he got his charity to pay for. He'd have to pay tax every year on this, under this progressive consumption tax, as well as on the Trump yacht. All those things are providing consumption services. So this is what economists think needs to be done. I developed that proposal with one of the top economists in public finance. One of my a guy I've been working with, Alan Auerbach, who's at Berkeley. He would be one of my first choices for Treasury Secretary, a top tax economist at Berkeley. I've worked with him, written books and many articles over the years. And we've studied the marginal tax rates, the marginal tax brackets facing old people, young people, middle-aged people, poor people, rich people. They're incredibly high. So we have a dysfunctional fiscal system. I'm reforming food stamps. I'm providing, instead of the earned income tax credit, which takes money away from you if you earn too much money, I'm providing a $2,000 per person payment to every American. It's called a negative income tax. You remember Milton Friedman?
Yes.
He was proposing that. James Tobin, a liberal economist from Yale, was also very fond of the negative income tax idea. Well, it's right in my tax reform proposal. So my tax reform will generate massive investment. It will generate more revenue. It's not a voodoo economics proposal like Trump has. It's not voodoo economics like Clinton has. It's actual real economics. And I'd also be doing actual what we call fiscal gap accounting, put all those $206 trillion of debts on the books. And this, by the way, Joe, is a net debt. It's net of all the taxes available to pay for all the spending that's being projected. And all these projections are based on Congressional Budget Office forecasts. And the $206 trillion number is not coming from me. It's coming from this economist, Alan Auerbach, and William Gale, who's at the Brookings Institution. These guys are not right-wing kooks. They're left of center economists. They are invited by Democrats to come testify down in the House and the Senate. I'm typically invited by the Republicans these days, but I'm an independent. In the past, I was invited by the Democrats. And I've testified to Bernie Sanders. I guess it was last spring, I actually testified in the Senate Budget Committee. Bernie Sanders was about 10 feet away. I explained to him that, Mr. Sanders, Senator Sanders, our uh, fiscal gap, our true debt, is not 20 trillion, and it's not the 13 trillion and a half that's in the hands of the public after the Fed has printed money to buy back some of this gross debt. The true number is more like 13 and a half in terms of official debt, but it's actually, that's the 77% of GDP that Trump was, or somebody was referring to last night in the debate, but it's actually 206 trillion. And here's why. You guys in Congress have kept all these liabilities to pay me and you your Social Security benefits, me and you your Medicare benefits, maybe not you and me our old age Medicaid benefits, but my mom who's 97. So all these things are off the books. So is paying for defense spending into the future. So is paying for the president's lunch, for the gas for Air Force One. All those things are being kept off the books, as are all the assets to pay, all the future taxes. Let's put it all in the books. It's 206 trillion. The country is in worse fiscal shape than any other developed country, with one exception, which is Luxembourg. Now, you wouldn't think that Luxembourg is actually in terrible fiscal shape, but when you do the accounting right, it actually is. And at some point, the brilliant guys on Wall Street who are making so much money are going to wake up to the reality of what our fiscal situation is. And at that point, they're going to dump the dollar. They're going to dump our currency is going to turn into a hot cake and a hot potato, and inflation will take off because the Fed has been printing money at the wazoo since 2007 through today. They've printed about $3 trillion. Between 1913 and 2007, the Fed had printed only $800 billion in its entire history. Over the next 7, 8, 9 years, they increased that money printing by a factor of 4. So we have the basis for hyperinflation. The only reason we don't have it is that the Fed has been very good in convincing people it's not going to happen. And expectations play an enormously important role, because if you start to believe inflation is going to take off, it will take off because you will start trying to unload your money very quickly. And we saw this in Russia. Here's one other thing your viewers need to understand. I don't just work on US policy. I work all over the world. I spend 2 weeks a year in Russia working with the Russian think tanks. I'm a full professor at Boston University, so I teach students, undergraduates, freshmen, as well as graduate students. And I talk about, so I do my job. I also have a small business that does personal financial planning software. So I'm involved in the real world. I've worked for the Bank of England. I've lived in Germany as a high school exchange student for a year. I speak German. I lived in France for a month as a high school exchange student. I've worked with the president of Chile directly, who's a close friend of mine. The former president of Bolivia is a close friend of mine on many projects and giving advice about their economies. I've really worked all over. I've gone to China to talk to some of their leaders about pension reform. I've talked to the Russian members of their assembly about fixing the Russian economy. So you're talking to somebody who has had a lot of international experience. One of the emails that just came today was from the top Russian newspaper, which has a 2 million person distribution, just asked me to do an interview about my candidacy. Now, the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times cannot bother to have a reporter spend 5 minutes talking to me about my candidacy, because they don't understand. They're too lazy. They're too much involved in what the latest stupid thing that Trump said. And the latest stupid thing he said last night was he would not congratulate Clinton if she won. Now, who really gives a damn about whether or not he congratulates? If he loses and she wins, he's dead meat anyway, right? He's probably going to go to jail for the malfeasance he's engaged in with his foundation. I mean, he's writing checks for personal things from his foundation. He's misappropriating the funds from a charity. I don't know whether Clinton has legal issues with the kind of deals she's been doing with the Clinton Foundation and seeing people disproportionately in order to get them to cough up money. But I'm going to leave that to the side. That's not the real big issue. The real big issue is how we're treating our children, the kinds of threats and risks we're leaving them. And if the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times doesn't have a single reporter to cover my candidacy. I'm the only writing candidate, the only real writing candidate in the country, the only registered writing candidate nationwide. If they can't spare a single reporter, but you, Joe, have an hour or so to spare, there's something wrong with those three newspapers. And their front, the New York Times front page headline today on their website was Clinton, Trump fails to say that he would congratulate or cheer on Hillary if she were to win. That's not news. That's just opinion. That's bias, okay? So Trump is absolutely right that the New York Times is heavily biased towards Clinton. The entire media is. But of course, he engineered that himself. He's responsible for that. He's made enemies of the press. But the press also has a journalistic job to report to people who's actually out there. Who can they vote for? If searches on Google for writing candidates are at the all-time high, which they now are, and I'm the only real writing candidate, how come I'm not getting called? The Wall Street Journal could bother to write an article about me. They did. The Dallas Morning News, the Boston Globe, CNBC. I was on CBS website yesterday. Been on a lot of media. I've been on the two top newspapers. The top two newspapers in Germany wrote 2,000-word columns, very long articles about my candidacy. The top newspaper in Australia wrote a long article about my candidacy. The top newspaper in Denmark wrote, and now the top newspaper in Russia is going to write. But the New York Times can't do it. There's something wrong with that picture. We have lazy, uninformed journalists who think their job is to distribute opinion as opposed to report the news. And the news in this context, what we really care about is what will this person do to help our children, to help our economy, to keep us safe? Is that person a mature person? Does he come with a baggage train full, train full of baggage that is going to plague him or her through the next 4 to 8 years? And with either of these two candidates, it's going to be civil political war from day one. They won't get anything accomplished. Whereas an independent like myself, I know Paul Ryan, he's a friend of mine. I know Barney Frank, he's obviously no longer in Congress, but I've been in his company a number of times. I think he would view me as a reasonable person. I know members of, Tim Kaine is somebody who endorsed using fiscal gap accounting as the form of debt reporting for our U.S. Government. So Tim Kaine is on record as endorsing, not just endorsing, but sponsoring what's called the Inform Act. So it's THEINFORMACT.org. If your viewers go there, they will see a bill that I wrote mostly. I got some millennials to get to the members of Congress to sponsor this bill. So Senator Kaine and Senator Thune from South Dakota, he's a Republican, Kaine's a Democrat, he's Clinton's running mate. They sponsored a bill to tell the public to force the CBO, the OMB, and the GAO to do fiscal gap accounting every year and to honestly report that we're broke. Now, Tim Kaine has been on the campaign trail and he hasn't mentioned boo about the fiscal gap, even though he's the co-sponsor of this bill. But I like him, Tim Kaine. I think he's a good person, and I could get along with him very easily if I were president. So I'm trying to get across the idea that we need to have a marriage counselor in between these two feuding sets of children. We need somebody to knock their heads together and tell them, listen, guess what? A president just got elected who wasn't a member of your two parties. Your two parties are history, and I'm going to make sure that happens unless you guys actually start thinking for yourselves. Right now, we have a situation where if a member of the House who's a Democrat and a member of the House who's a Republican go down the escalator together, they will be sanctioned by their two parties. They will both get into trouble. They can lose their committee positions. They'll be penalized. So we have a situation where people are being forced to vote the party line and not even talk to the opposition. That has to change. That's not democracy. This is some form of, this harkens back to what's going on in the Soviet Union 15, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or goes on in the elections in Russia these days, or many other places where there's no true democracy. We do not have true democracy. I'm the only attempt in this election at true democracy. Because if a writing candidate wins, a writing candidate will be available in every year in the future.
Professor, isn't there a danger that the solutions that we seek today reflect a country that no longer exists or will not exist in the future? Just yesterday, my wife mentioned to me, she said, I understand they're opening a plant, I think she said Kansas or Nebraska, and it was a mammoth plant, hundreds of thousands of square feet. And I said, well, that's nice. I said, and I forgot, I want to say she said Nestle's, but I'm sure that's wrong. I just don't recall. But what I do recall her saying is she said, and you know what's unique about this plant? I said, no, I never heard about it. She said, they only require 7 employees. My point being is that the world is changing so dramatically. Technology is changing everything, the way we do things. It's displacing jobs by the multitudes. Whether or not people come in from Mexico and stay in the United States is more a subject of available jobs and whether or not the government decides to give people something for nothing. Those are the main issues. If we don't give people something for nothing, and there are no jobs, if you have a wall, you won't keep people out. You'll keep people in who want to go out. And I'm just saying that the world seems to be upside down, and anything that we propose today has to reflect a technologically, exponentially changing technology of tomorrow. And how do we do that when we can't even perceive of what this technology will be for us tomorrow? And by virtue of the fact that we are losing so many jobs, and so many jobs that we're losing are a natural part of the process of technology and learning to do things more efficiently. Please.
Yeah, Joe, I'm just going to have to plug us in here so I don't lose you. Hang on just one second, because I can see that the red light's on my back.
You're in the red light district too.
So, I told you at the outset, I'm an academic economist, so in part, as well as a businessman and a consultant. And so I have a lot of different hats, and I work on a lot of different topics. And one of the topics I've written about recently is automation. And I wrote a paper with a couple grad students and Jeff Sachs, who's an economist at Columbia. And Jeff's very concerned, as am I, about exactly what you're referring to: huge plants with no workers, and the automation. And we see this at CVS, where you're checking out and you're checking out with a machine. It used to be that there was a couple of machines, a lot of people, and then we had people helping the machines, and now there's just the machines and no people, period, very few. So we wrote a paper that's on my website at kotlikoff.net, my academic website, which is called Robots Are Us. It's the first demonstration of any economist that this process of automation it could actually make everybody through time worse off. Could actually produce what we call an immiseration of society. And what you have in the long run is, because there's a kind of a contradiction here, or paradox. If these robots, if you want to call it that, put people out of business, out of work, or out of good work, then they won't be able to afford the products that the robots are selling.
Right.
And we modeled that in a very simple model, and showed that over time what could happen is that people would be so poor as to not be able to save enough, so that this much better technology in the future that's available would still not succeed in making us better off, because we would have too little investment, too little physical capital. We'd have more technology, but less physical capital, we'd actually end up worse off. So I'm particularly concerned about what you're referring to, but what this model is showing us, and these are very stylized models, but they kind of tell us messages and tell us what to worry about. That's why we economists write down very simplified mathematical frameworks so we can keep everything straight and keep track of why something's happening and make sure we've got everything logically correct. And then we try other models and see, and we argue between ourselves what makes more sense, what's more realistic, and can we test this with the data? What data? That's the whole process, intellectual process in economics. But the message from our study is that you need to take from the winners and give to the losers. You need to redistribute from the rich, the people that own these technologies, to those who have been left out or lost their jobs. And you can't do that with the existing tax system. So I'm trying to set up a tax system that will actually make Donald Trump pay his taxes. It will make Hillary Clinton, I don't know how, she's also, if she doesn't get elected, she's going to become a billionaire too if she keeps giving talks at $250,000 a pop to banks. And what does she buy with that? What did they buy with her with that $250,000? I mean, I think that's really disgusting. The fact that she's being paid that much money. Somebody should have mentioned that in the debate last night, or one of Chris Wallace. I mean, don't you think it's not a government official who turns around and then goes and in effect gets bribed by the financial markets, by Wall Street, to do their bidding the next time they're in office, or to use their contacts that they've acquired? I mean, that's really malfeasance at a very clear level. Yeah. But we need to take super rich people, and I include Hillary Clinton in this, and her husband, who's also engaged in the same thing, to pay their taxes. And then we have to have a more redistributive system, and that's what my fiscal reform is all about. Yeah. It's actually going to be more progressive.
Let's take your example of internet school, which is with us now, and people are converting. More people are homeschooling today than ever before, and I agree with that. I think just marching kids onto a bus and then traveling somewhere to go to a building where they have to sit in a box and listen to someone preach, good, bad, or indifferent, and for 5 or 6 hours they get restless, they're cooped up, they lose all their ability to think, to be creative, and then they march back to school and they have at home, they have to write their. To me, that's so archaic, and it's almost criminal the way our school system works. But when you have homeschooling, or the internet schooling, which is homeschooling, then you have the child at home. You don't need the school bus. You don't need the bus driver. You don't need people making the buses. You don't need the teachers anymore. You don't need the building, the custodian, and I can go on and on and on. The number of jobs that are lost, that are, quite frankly, in my opinion, right now are totally unnecessary and are detrimental to our children, not helpful to our children for the most part. But they can stay home, and the person responsible, they can be with the person who's responsible for their education, and that's their parents, not somebody who's 5 miles away. But we see that just in that one example of internet schooling, learning from a computer.
So Joe, here's my concern with homeschooling. I think it's great for certain houses, for certain families, but it has to be overseen by the state or the community, because only 25% of our of people actually get a college degree, and they generally don't get college degrees in science and math. So you've got people that are not really qualified to teach science and math, let alone other subjects, potentially teaching their children. And so I see that as a danger. I think we need to have this kind of technology brought into the school, and use the the reforms I was talking about, which is each kid spends 2, 3, 4 hours a day, depending on how the school what the teacher decides is best, in front of a individual screen in a pod, and proceeds at his own pace. And then the teacher can walk around and spend time with the individual student and help them one-on-one. So that's a way of equalizing education and lowering effective class sizes. I agree that if all the parents had the time to spend homeschooling their kids, which is enormous cost, one-on-one, that's like, one person for maybe 2 or 3 kids, that would be terrific if they were really great teachers, but I don't think they're going to be really great teachers. So I don't view, as an educator, I don't think that's a great pedagogic model, to tell you the truth, in general.
And we will have to totally reform the education system. I remember the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs published a study last year that showed that in all the major cities, and Tulsa being, to me, it's not a major city, it's a big town, but including Tulsa and Oklahoma City and towns like that, all over the United States, only 51% of the students in the cities actually graduate high school. So the whole system's a failure, and it has to be totally revamped. Now, maybe total homeschooling is not the answer, but a combination thereof, or a change of what we have now, which will still affect employment and all the other things that you've been talking about. They all become affected by it because we're not doing the same thing. And my point being is that sometimes when we discuss about what we need to do to make things better in the future, but we may be talking about an America that no longer exists. I guess that was my point.
Yeah, I think you're making some really good points. I think when I become president, we'll certainly be talking to you about your ideas
and I will be your advisor, okay? Free of charge.
The Secretary of Education. But I spent a lot of time in Switzerland just recently. Last few years, I've been to Switzerland many times, and I've talked to people in the government, the Swiss government, including the ambassador from Switzerland to the U.S., about their educational system. They're also facing this automation, these robots that are coming to take away people's jobs, but they have a very close connection between industry and high schools, where they take the kids, a lot of kids, probably about 3/4 of the kids, into jobs while they're still in high school, and they spend 2-3 days a week outside of the school, but in the high school, in the factory, or in the insurance company, or whatever it is, where there's a really close connection, where the businesses do the recruiting in real time over several years, and they groom these people for jobs when they leave high school, if they're not going to go into college. But the system is still flexible enough for you to shift courses and go back into a college track or a graduate program track. I've always been concerned about that, but it seems to be working quite well for Switzerland. You look at Switzerland, and there's much more equality. The standard of living is much higher than in our country. There isn't this inequality that we're facing in the U.S. People are very well educated. If we were just to copy everything the Swiss did, we would be far ahead of the game. So my instinct is to have somebody from Mexico be probably my grad student. He's smarter than Trump, for sure. Guillermo Lagarde, I'll mention his name publicly. He's a terrific grad student. I'd like to make him head of the INS, because he would do by our country much better than what we have in the INS right now, and which is to treat people inhumanely. At the same time, we need to secure our borders. Trump is correct on that, and Clinton's also saying that too. But we also have to have a reasonable legal immigration policy. But I, am with you. Automation is a big problem. Inequality is a big problem. We have to address all these problems, and we have to use lessons from people from the outside. We have to get skilled people. Like, I would take the top head of the Secretary of Education in the Swiss Republic, and bring him here to be the secretary, or her to be the Secretary of Education here in the U.S. Why not have some foreign-born nationals be in our cabinet who would actually teach us some lessons about what has worked abroad? Because the idea of just shutting down our Department of Education, that's nuts. What we want is our Department of Education to be the place that promotes new ideas, new innovation, new techniques for the states, the communities, the towns, to figure out what's going to be best because we have failing education throughout the country. We're slipping these international rankings where it's a disaster. I wrote, again, if people go to Kotlikoff2016.com, you'll see a blog I posted again last night called The War on Our Children, The War on Our Children. And it goes through 10 things. And one of the 10 weapons goes through these 10 weapons that we're using to actually have a war with our children. And one of those is providing them with substandard education. It's gotten worse and worse through time. So I'm with you. Things are at a breaking point. They have to change. That's why I think there's so much anger among the Trump supporters. They don't know they don't really care who Trump is. They just know he's not Hillary Clinton. They know he's different. He's going to try and shake things up, and they can't be worse. So maybe they could be better.
Yeah.
That's where he's coming from.
I'm going to postulate that the use of the smartphone and the decentralizing of education being more individualized will breed a tremendous amount of entrepreneurship. It'll force people to be entrepreneurs. It'll give them the facilities to become entrepreneurs in their own way. In other words, we're going to see a big decentralization of business where we're not going to need big factories so much. We're not going to need big corporations, but each person in themselves can be their own company doing their own thing. So I'm not so pessimistic about the future. I think the future is going to be so different than it is today, and the changes will be so exponential and come over so quickly that the institutions we have today will be unable to cope with the change.
Well, Joe, I hope you're right, but here's my concern, and it has to go back to the fact that you're a libertarian and you've got a libertarian talk radio show, right?
Yes.
And I'm concerned that we're not just at war with our children, but we're also at war with the bureaucrats.
Right.
The bureaucrats have made our tax system dysfunctional. They made our Social Security system dysfunctional, our healthcare system, our banking system. The Dodd-Frank bill was just a full employment act for bureaucrats. We had about 130 federal and state banking authorities and agencies. They probably increased that by a factor of 2 at the end of a couple of years of Dodd-Frank. Now, what I'm concerned about with small businesses is based on what's occurring today in our country. If you're a small business person, and I am one, I have a small software company that we make personal financial planning software. You can check economicsecurityplanning.com, that's the name of it. But we have Social Security and lifetime financial planning software. But the thing I see is if you try and expand and sell across the country and have employees across the country, you immediately run into taxation by every state government, and it's different taxation. And it's not just the states, the localities can all have their separate tax systems. So you can easily have to file 3,000 tax returns if you wanted to operate suppose you just wanted to sell something like a blender with salespeople throughout the country. You would definitely have to file 50 state corporate income taxes, possibly 50 use taxes to the states, 50 sales taxes, 50 franchise taxes, and then you've got potentially all these local taxes to pay on top of workman's comp, FICA taxes, federal income taxes. So it becomes prohibitively expensive to be filing all these different tax forms. You're talking about maybe $150,000, $200,000 bills in terms of complying with all these rules. You need to have this unified, and that's one of the things I would do from day one. I would get the states to agree that we need to have one place where a small business can go and file, and depending on where he's operating, he'll pay taxes to that state and to this state. It'll be apportioned, but we're not going to destroy small businesses the way we are by forcing them to spend all their time dealing with these bureaucrats in the different. I get letters every day from a different state telling me about tax returns that they're looking for, and I'm just an internet company. I don't actually have any employees in those states. I don't have what's called nexus. Right. So I have to file in states just to not pay taxes, as crazy as that is. And that, of course, is extremely expensive for a small company like mine. So right. you're trying to, I'm trying to employ 9 people, and these bureaucrats are in the way of putting, in the process of putting us out of business because they're so expensive to comply with. So, I'm on to this. Donald Trump is not on to anything except his ego, and Hillary Clinton is on to power. I'm on to how to really, practically speaking, fix the country, how to practically speaking protect our country, how to practically speaking not get us into another land war, how to deal with ISIS in an aggressive way, but not get us bogged down so they can attack us at will, and how to deal with this long-term fiscal problem, how to fix Social Security, healthcare, Social Security, Social Security, healthcare, taxes, banking, environment, the energy policy, and education, and immigration. So if you go to Kotlikoff2016.com, you will see what a true adult thinks has to be done to fix our country. You'll see that there's actually one adult running for president who's not an extremist on one side or the other, who's actually been trained over his entire lifetime to fix the economic problems. That's what I've worked on my entire life. I've written a book on fixing the healthcare system. It's called The Healthcare Fix, and the banking system called Jimmy Stewart is Dead. On Social Security, it was a New York Times best-selling book on the taxes. I've written an important book on dynamic tax policy. So I've written about this stuff. There was yesterday a study that was discussed on CBS News on their website about climate policy and the fact that the Paris Accords could actually make climate change worse because they're going to tell dirty energy users, dirty energy producers to use it or lose it. And the dangers of that, the fact that the Paris Accord could actually make things worse than doing nothing because they're going to promote a fast burn. And we've had something like a 10% increase in dirty energy production since 2013 across the globe. And I think it has very much to do with the message that we're sending dirty energy producers. So we need to do the following, Joe. We need to have a high tax rate now that declines through time, that says slow down your use of it because good times are coming, lower tax rates in the future. We want to have a slow burn. It's very paradoxical, but the Paris Accords could make things worse off, and I'm very much concerned about climate change. So I'm not a climate doubter. I'm a climate change believer, but I'm saying if you have somebody who's a lawyer, that's what Hillary Clinton is, or a businessman who's never spent a day in economics courses, or maybe did so decades ago, they're not equipped, they're not technically trained to fix the country, or to deal with something like climate change, or to deal with something like Social Security. They just don't know what they're talking about, or to understand that our debt is 10 times larger than they're saying on TV. So we're talking about the choice between a grown-up, somebody who's technically, competent, who can handle this job, who's not the top person in the country we could choose, but who's the top person among the 5 or 6 people who can legally be elected on November 8th, and ongoing decline as a country. So I'm just asking every adult, every grown-up in this country to think about their children and to vote for the children on November 8th. And I think if they do that, they're going to write in Laurence Kotlikoff in the presidential space, and Edward Leamer in the vice. Edward Leamer, by the way, is a top UCLA economist, one of the top economists in the world. So you'd have 2 economists for the first time in the country's history as president and vice president.
Well, let's hope the American voter comes to their senses, okay, and vote for you. And if all else fails, Gary Johnson, okay, maybe in that order.
Well, vote for me, and vote for Ed, because we need your votes. Gary Johnson does not have a clue how to fix anything. Trust me, I've seen.
That's unfortunate, right? I know they call him libertarian light.
Yeah, and by the way, Bill Weld does also not have a clue. People that are not trained in economics are not going to be able to. It's just like an engineer building a bridge across a river. He knows what to do, or she knows what to do, but Hillary Clinton is not going to build that bridge. She's going to build it, and it will fall into the river.
Right.
And the same thing with Bill Weld.
Right.
So we need to have people actually know what the hell they're doing at long last. And that's why I'm running, because I'm really, just like you, extremely angry by what the politicians have done to our country, what the bureaucrats are doing to our country.
Professor, thank you so much for being on our program. It's really been a pleasure and an honor, and it's been very educational. We appreciate it. We wish you all the luck in the world, and I hope we do accept our invitation to return at a later date.
I absolutely will. I love talking to you, so thanks again.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.